see you've found our little hiding spot in the universe. Don't get too comfortable. This is a place where you will find those with an experience that's out of this world, and possibly deep within your life. I welcome you to the Oracles with James Tyson. Lean forward and listen. We will pull you into a supernatural journey with guests from around the world, each one experiencing some of the most extraordinary phenomena this wee planet has to offer. Now, here are the Oracles with James Tyson.
Thank you, Liam, and thank you, listener, for tuning in to today's episode of the Oracles with James Tyson. It's me, James, and today joining me is my friend Tui Snider. Tui is out of Texas, has written a new book, 6 Feet Under Texas. Now, if you know Tui, she is a taphophile, or sometimes I call it taphiophile, but that's not really how you say it. But a taphophile is somebody who likes cemeteries. And she is a cemetery, she's a cemetery aficionado. She's actually turned her hobby into more than just hanging out in cemetery, having a picnic, which honestly is a little bit creepy, but she's turned it into a vocation where she teaches courses in this too. She's an author, a speaker, a researcher, specializing in this type of overlooked history, cemetery symbolism, and haunted lore. And as she puts it, I used to write fiction, but then I moved to Texas. And yeah, Texas is full of stuff. And it's amazing. She has worn a lot of hats in her life, literally, because she's especially fond of berets. And her writing and photography have been featured in numerous outlets, including Coast to Coast AM, TV stations in Texas, Authentic Texas, Cult of the Weird, Lone Star, Literary Life, among many, many others. She loves giving presentations and occasionally teaches classes based on her books at a college in Fort Worth. So go to her website over tuisnider.com and see if she's got a class coming up. And if you're in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, it'd be kind of fun to drop by and learn a little bit about your own history and a lot of the cemeteries and things that are out there and all the other woo-woo stuff that she's involved in. Her best-selling books include Paranormal Texas, as I've said, Understanding Cemetery Symbols, which is not as easy to say as I thought it was going to be. 6 Feet Under Texas is the one we're going to talk about today. She enjoys connecting with her readers all over the globe and her weekly newsletter. And if you want to know more about that newsletter, go to tuisnider.com. 6 Feet Under Texas. What is that going to be all about, you ask? Well, it's about some kind of cool things and not so cool people, and some interesting people that were buried actually in Texas in the last 100 or so years. We talk about guys like Peter Mayhew, who played Chewbacca in Star Wars. Yeah, he's a good Londoner, buried in Boyd, Texas, all 7'4" of them. Talk a bit about him. We touch on a lot of. We don't get really into symbolism. We talk a bit about why we think cemeteries are haunted, why she likes cemeteries, why you, and I know you, listener, why you like hanging out in cemeteries too. But we talk a little bit on why people do that. We talk about cremation, why people, we've gone off on the kind of the cremation tangent. In my neighborhood here in Vancouver, British Columbia, it's like freaking land is worth a lot. And 30 years ago, you could get a plot in the only cemetery in Vancouver, and I think it was 10 grand 30 years ago. So yeah, real estate prices have gone up a lot, so maybe it is better to get your loved one put in a box and take them out. And we talk about sprinkling ashes where you're not supposed to, and why people do it, and talk a bit about that. We kind of, it's Tui. She and I just go off in tangents and talk about all sorts of things, from my policing running into dead people to her being chased at the age of 9 when a molester was chasing her and her friend in their little brownie outfits across the cemetery, and he was tripping over the tombstones while they were zigzagging in and out of them. So she's been doing the cemetery jogs and runs and activity since she was a very little girl. We do talk to her about her book, 6 Feet Under, and a few of her other books touching on some really creepy cemeteries she's bumped into and stuff that she's done in Texas. and a little bit of the history of those cemeteries, and again, why she's fascinated with those places our dead people are buried, and the cool mausoleums and things that are built up there. And then I go off on a tangent about a really cool cemetery in Cuba, in Havana, that I was at. And yeah, it's fun. And I think she talks about some dead people in Rarotonga in the South Pacific. Yeah, it's a eclectic interview, but it's all about dead people and where we put our dead. So I'm going to go down the hall here and go get her now. Tui, how are you today?
I am fabulous. How are you doing, James?
I am well. I've read your book, 6 Feet Under Texas, and it's rather interesting. You've got a lot of very cool dead people.
Oh, yeah. There are really some interesting people in there. And what's weird is I actually have 2 mysterious, unknown, one-legged people. I just think it's weird how they, there's some strange things that came throughout the whole book.
Only 2 strange?
Yeah, there's only 2. Well, no.
Only 2 strange things in that book?
But I thought it was weird. Okay, because I was talking to someone about the book, and my husband goes, tell him about the one-legged man. And I'm like, which one? There's 2 in the book. And then we burst out laughing. I'm like, why is that? Mysterious, unknown, one-legged people. I don't know, whatever.
That's kind of cool. Hey, why is it you have this obsession with graveyards and tombstones? Now, there's a term for that. It's taphophile, right?
Yeah, taphophile, because taph is
taphophile. Yeah.
Yeah, taphophile. Taph is, Greek, ancient Greek for tomb. So that's why we get the word like epitaph. Yeah, but a taphophile is someone who enjoys cemeteries, a tombstone tourist, if you will. I find that for me, visiting cemeteries, historic cemeteries, really brings history to life for me, which seems ironic, but it helps me see history. It brings it to life in a way that nothing else does.
Yeah, it's interesting for me. I love, we have tours here in one of the older cemeteries. Now, we're on the west coast, so of Canada, the lower left coast here, and really the Europeans didn't really start hanging out here till the 1800s. So it's not like we have that's the other side of the continent where we have cemeteries that go back to the 1600s. And I say cemeteries because the First Nations that were here really, they had burial grounds and they were marked with something that was less permanent. They'd have out here, they'd have cedar boxes with belongings in them in a tree. Well, that's going to last, 30, 40 years before it completely dissolves and everything falls to the end. But Europeans, bless our souls, we came out here and we make things out of stone, and you are going to be remembered for the rest of your life. And if you got a lot of money, you are going to be remembered really well because we're going to build a mausoleum and a freaking everything else around it. And your remains will stay there. So what out here, I'll do the tour, and it's only in the 1800s, but it's really interesting because they actually, the couple that puts a tour on, they have themes.
Oh,
so
neat.
It was, the one I was on, I was like in the 1800s, and it was people who died in accidents. And they'd research all these accidents. These kids all died. This one died falling through the ice. They were ice skating on the lake. And then these 3 people who beside them, they all went in to try to save them, and they all died too. So it was like, that's really interesting. Or this, the horse cart went down the hill and killed the 2 people on the cart, and then killed 2 people it ran into, and they're all buried in this section here. It was really weird. And but that's the tours, and I was really interested in that because it was historic to the actual location, the town we were in, and I got a little bit more of an understanding of what it was like through their experience and their stories on what it was like to live in 1870 or 1880 or even the early 1900 or say 1910 to 1920 in that community, and the types of illnesses they had and the types of accidents and the types of events that were going on was all laid out in front of you, literally laid out in front of you with names. So that was I find that very interesting.
Yeah, the 1800s really are a bit of a heyday, especially during the Victorian era. That's a real heyday for cemetery symbolism. The Victorians incorporated a lot of ancient Greek symbols and just a lot of things that they took across the pond with them. But I like what you mentioned too. So that I've got that whole book out, Understanding Cemetery Symbols. It really focuses on a lot of symbols that you will see, especially in that type of cemetery that's a bit more grand, where like the garden cemeteries or the cemeteries where the wealthy people could have those fancy mausoleums and all that. But I also wanted, in this book, I included some things like, I really wanted to give a focus less on the symbolism of the headstone symbolism, which I really do get fascinated by, because I think we've really lost a lot of our poetic sense and our sense of how being able to connect with symbols, and which means we aren't as good at like interpreting our dreams, for instance, which is another fascination, a lifelong fascination of mine. So I think that might be partly why I'm really into that. But with this book, 6 Feet Under Texas, I really wanted to just imbue it with flavor of history, so that as you read each chapter, it was about a certain person usually, but it also kind of give you a feeling for a time travel, like what would it have been like to be in 1870, like you say, here in Texas, perhaps, if your family was not wealthy, or even if you were at that time, even a little earlier too, like let's say you're one of the early settlers here. When you passed away, they might just do a pioneer burial cairn, which is a very nicely laid out stack of stones. And I have a really good example in my book that shows you what they look like, how they're supposed to look, because a stack of stones doesn't stand up too well to Mother Nature unless it's tended. And of course, wooden crosses fall apart unless they're made from some really hardy tree like bodark. But I really wanted to give a feeling for what it was like. Like I have that one chapter about Sally Bowman, who gets shot by Comanches, and she was shot at such close range that her dress caught on fire. Yeah. I thought, wow, that's fascinating. So things like that. You mentioned that. So I did try with this book. It's less of like a guidebook to cemeteries. This is more like armchair travel, and I also show you so you could theoretically visit these places in person. But like I said, I really wanted to give the reader a sense of a journey through time, hopefully, as they read it. Like, wow, well, that what if, like we all like to play when we're little kids. What if I were this or that?
Yeah, that her murder, she was tending some of her family had some prize horses. She was tending them.
Yeah.
Got attacked by a couple of Comanches, and she's booking it back on her horse, trying to get back home, and they run her down and shoot her in the back, or shoot her, I guess probably hit her in the back because they're shooting her from behind.
Yeah, they shot her in the back.
You would almost have to actually have a rifle to burn your clothing. I'm guessing they took a bit of artistic license when they were describing that it didn't probably set her clothes on fire, but it probably burnt. There was a burn mark.
Maybe that's it.
On her clothing. That's almost a contact. It's a policeman again. That's within 2 or 3 feet of them.
I need to make you my forensic expert when I'm writing this stuff, Yeah. I'm just going to Facebook message you like, James, what about this? Because I know nothing about firearms.
This really happened? Yeah. And in looking at rifles going back to the 1800s too, they did. We're kind of spoiled by television shows where the guy with the rifle is shooting and there's no recoil of the rifle, or it doesn't really go back into his, and a little bit of smoke comes out the barrel. But those were a heavy grain, big bore guns back then, and when that bullet came out, there was a lot of unburnt gunpowder that was still kind of, well, it's not exploding, but burning in the air as it was going. So you'd have these things. And, we get a little bit of a peek into this from some television shows where they're saying, well, he fired the gun, there should be some residue on his hand.
Yeah.
If you had a pistol, or but a revolver, you'll get, whatever blew up, because it's an explosion inside the shell, and actually, get a wax impression. You can pull bits and pieces of it off. But yeah, you shoot at let's say a white sheet with one of those old 1800s rifles from 2 or 3 feet away. it's going to mess up the sheet. There'll be a bullet hole in it, but you're going to see spattering and all sorts of other, and it's going to burn. You'll see a flash because, these things, when they went off, there was a fire coming out the end of it. So yeah, they were kind of messy, depending on also what kind of ammunition you had, whether you made the ammunition yourself, it was, you're loading your own bullets, or, it was an older bullet maybe, and it just didn't burn properly. Yeah, so that was interesting in the story about the burning of her clothing while she was riding. Mm-hmm. That's a shame, they were horse thieves. Why are they trying to kill her? Was she 16 years old or something?
She was 16, yeah. I know, it's so sad. And
sorry,
the neighbors got together. Go ahead.
In the book, you have a picture of her grave marker, her tombstone, and I look at those kind of tombstones, and that from the 1800s, there's a ton of information on that. There's scrolling. It's really detailed work, and it's aged really, really well. It's got this neat patina to it, and it's worn, and those are the kind of tombstones I really enjoy reading and looking at, because it's so busy with all sorts of information on it, and maybe a little poem or something, and describing the person, and was it I don't know if that's marble or not, but it was very common, that stone in the southwest, in the southwest U.S. I see a lot of actually, I shouldn't say Southwest. I've seen those in Gettysburg too. It's just the way that marble is worn makes it really, really. I connect with it for some reason. It's not very modern, chiseled, sharp corners. It's worn.
Yeah, it takes a lot of effort to do that. I spoke at a monument builders conference a couple of years ago, which was fascinating because people who make headstones, it tends to be a family business. So I came armed. I was given a talk about cemetery symbolism, which they were really wanting to know about. But I had a lot of questions about material and just how do you guys do this and what does this mean? And they gave me a real appreciation for the craftsmanship. Like that Sally Bowman, the top part where it says Sally B on it, those are raised letters. And when you pointed out, it's suddenly obvious. They were saying it takes so much more effort because you have to chisel out everything around it to make that raised lettering. And then I would show them different headstones, like some of my favorite ones from around the world, and they would be like, "Oh, well, this material that's made from that's a really fine grain marble. I can't believe it looks so good. Are you sure this is outside?" Things like that. And so it was really educational. And another reason that I just wanted to say that the Victorian era, even around the Civil War and beyond, headstones are really interesting then, because in the Puritan era, you didn't really have much on there. You just, except for it might say memento mori, which means remember you must die. It's like you could forget that back then. But anyway, they would have very dire things on there, and it was not about the person. But from the 1800s, you have this wonderful period of time, I think back when people were much more connected to their poetic sense, their symbolic sense, and also people planned what they were going to have at their gravesite. Let's say you came across, a windfall at your business. You'd be like, hey, I think I'm going to commission a monument for the family plot. And it's going to be this, and it's going to have symbols on it. And so, in a way, like when I was a teenager and I would think about fancy graves, I kind of looked down at them and was like, oh, the hubris, what were they thinking? But now I love that because you're sharing the story of your family, and it's so meaningful.
Yeah, I was in Cuba, in Havana, and did a graveyard tour and looked at, it was a mausoleum of the Bacardi family, Bacardi rum. And
did it have bats on it?
Yeah, it did. It had a bat on it. Cool. It was really cool. And it's like, it's one of those places where it's built on a rock, basically. So everything's above ground. So everything is built up off of the ground, so it's all marble and like old European above ground, very, very kind of Roman Catholic kind of looking mausoleums. Am I using the right word, mausoleum? Is that what Like a kind of elaborate built.
A mausoleum is the above ground structure where you can store caskets. It comes from, I think, the mausoleus was one of the ancient wonders of the world. The Greek world, once again, goes back to ancient Greece. But mausoleum would be the above ground thing where you could, it looks like a house above ground where you can actually, but it's usually stone, and you can store maybe 6 or 7 caskets in there.
Yeah, it was
depending.
It was very, very cool. I think one of the Bacardis was back in the day actually a founder of where Havana is now.
I just remembered it was the Halicarnassus. That was it. I was just trying to think. It was in the tip of my tongue. That was the famous mausoleum that was one of the Halicarnassus is one of the ancient, like, you know how there's the modern 7 wonders of the world and there's the ancient 7 wonders of the world, and I knew I had something in my brain about mausoleums in there. Anyway, yeah.
Oh, very cool.
All right. Now I can relax.
Okay. Now you're not going to phone me at 3:00 in the morning.
Yeah,
I remember.
I remember
okay,
now.
Tui, thanks.
Yeah.
Lord, just send me an email for God.
Yeah, could.
I love, like I say, like walking through old cemeteries. Not like you though. You walk through them with a sketchbook and a camera, or a notebook and a camera, and write everything down.
And a picnic. Quite often a picnic. I was going to say, in fact, if people want to see more about Sally Bowman, I did just do a video at her cemetery, Deep Creek Cemetery. And my hubby and I did have a picnic with us when we went. It's a really good one for a picnic. So, is perfectly fine, good for a picnic. If it has, if it's old, and you're not going to be seeing modern burials. Like, I don't like to go to modern cemeteries, and if I do, some cemeteries, of course, they have a modern section and an older section. I like to be in the section where everybody would be dead because it's from, 120 or 200 years ago, So if you bump into somebody, they're going to be a history buff or not a mourner. If I go to, I live kind of close to where the guy who played Chewbacca is buried, and there's an old section there, but there's also a new section, and I've gone there several times and just turned around because I see people there who are mourning. I don't want to bug them. But getting back to what makes it good for a picnic is if it has a nice bench or nice flat tombs where you can put your food. And I laugh because people are often freaked out at the idea of having a picnic in a cemetery, but it actually is an ancient tradition. The ancient Greeks, one of the first things they would build at their, if they could, at their family plot would be they would put a table tomb, and a table tomb just looks like a table. And the reason you have it is so that you have a place to put your snacks when you're going there. You're going to go and have whatever ancient Greeks would snack on, olives or something. And then the next thing you would build would be a bench because, hey, you want to sit down while you're snacking. And so the whole idea of having a picnic in cemeteries is you're connecting with an ancient tradition. And here in Texas, too, even a more modern one, even 100 years ago, people were having celebrations and, at least an annual picnic in their cemetery while they cleaned it up. So it's a very long-winded.
There's a very long-winded reason why you take food into a cemetery.
Yes.
You touched on really quickly there. You went through the Peter Mayhew's cemetery where he's buried, and he played Chewbacca in the Star Wars. I think he was 7'4", and born in London and somehow ended up in Aurora, or Boyd, Texas. Yeah,
which is right by Aurora. In fact, I was sort of surprised he wasn't buried in Aurora because it's hard to say Aurora over and over because it would have made sense by the space alien grave. I mean, if I were him, that's what I would have gone for. And it was interesting. The first time I visited his gravesite, Peter Mayhew's gravesite, there was just a little pile of dirt. I couldn't find it. And I was getting all distracted, and I'm wandering all over the place. And once again, if you want to, I do have a video of this if anyone wants to see it. But the groundskeepers were out, and this was pre-coronavirus, so I didn't mind asking them for help, and they were really helpful. And they showed us where he was buried, and it was just a little pile of dirt with a gingerbread cookie that looked like a Wookiee on it, and a tiny little black and white photo of Peter Mayhew. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that was so sweet. And then, they still haven't added too much. It has kind of a flat brass marker on it now. But they told me that he was so tall that it was hard finding a casket that he would fit in. And they said that at his actual ceremony, funeral ceremony, was really beautiful, that there was a horse-drawn carriage with it, and the horses had, I like this because I like anything sparkly. They said that the horses had like glitter hoofs. They had really sparkly hoofs, which I was like, oh, neat. No, filing that away. I want glitter hoofs.
I want glitter-hoofed horses bringing me in a carriage.
Yes.
Well, they probably went to Budweiser and got one of the carriages because he's, 7'4".
That's true. Yeah. What sort of carriage is he going to fit in? Interestingly, they do have a historic funeral carriage at that cemetery, Azaland. It's actually for a modern cemetery. It's really quite nice. A lot of more modern cemeteries just look like a golf course, because they're just all flat. There's no really interesting monuments. You can just mow over everything. And but Azaland's pretty cool.
You reminded me of Rodney Dangerfield's character. I can't remember the name of the movie now, where he said cemeteries and golf courses are the two biggest wastes of real estate.
Maybe Happy Gilmore or something?
Yeah, or Caddyshack, I think.
Caddyshack.
Was it Caddyshack?
Yeah,
I can't remember.
It
was Caddyshack. Yeah, so...
I love him.
But, to find a modern cemetery that kind of is still traditional, back in the day kind of cemetery, not like a Tombstone, Arizona, Boot Hill kind of cemetery, which is a little bit wonky, but still like an old historic cemetery where they take a little more care of the traditions of what our forefathers used to do when they buried a family, and maybe the architecture, keeping it kind of 100 years old-ish, because it honestly, to me, it keeps it spooky, keeps the kids out at night.
That's true.
To the most part. So I know in your book 6 Feet Under Texas, you talk about somebody's tomb. Oh, and I've lost it in my head here, but it's somebody's grave site you had to walk about a mile down to because they've locked it down. They've locked the gate because kids got in there and were kicking over tombstones. Oh,
it was Sally Bowman, and I don't know if it was kids. It's been quite interesting. There have been a few times where there has been cemeteries, that are vandalized, and when they find out who it is, it's some dude in his 50s who just had something, I don't know, something against it. There's a really gorgeous, there's a very historic cemetery, Thurber, in my favorite little ghost town in West Texas. And I think the guy that they finally caught who was running cattle through it and driving through it, he was in his 50s, but they caught him and arrested him as far as I know. So that was good. And I don't think they ever caught anybody on this, from what I heard. I haven't looked at it recently, but last I checked, I don't think they caught the culprit at Deep Creek Cemetery. But yeah, you have to do a little bit of a walk there now.
Yeah,
I know. Go ahead.
As you kind of hang out in cemeteries, doing your Taphophile thing, if you ever, and you and I, we talked about this before because we kind of hang out in that paranormal world. Do you ever see things out of the corner of your eye anymore, or hear things?
Oh yeah.
No one else is around. Voices.
Yeah.
Do you hear voices in your head?
Do I hear voices? Oh my goodness, there is just like a running. No, but it's beyond. Yeah, there's always music playing in my head. I've got to say that. I do have a pretty constant earworm, but I have had a couple experiences. Now, oddly enough, for someone who loves cemeteries as much as I do, and when I was 9 years old, I used to play in one, and my friends and I, we escaped. The guy tried to kidnap us, and the way we escaped was because we knew how to run through the, and not trip over the graves, and so he couldn't catch us. So you would think I would.
Well, hold on. I know you're saying this with a smile on your face because I can hear it in your voice. Somebody tried to kidnap you while you were in the cemetery when you were a kid?
Yes. So my friend and I, we went to the little Methodist church in Blacksburg, Virginia, and it had a graveyard next to it, a historic one. And we would get there, before the Girl Scout meetings a lot of times because we'd walk. Back then, kids were allowed to walk around. So we walked, all right, it was like Thursday or whatever. We got our Girl Scout meeting. Let's go. And, we'd play for a few minutes in the cemetery. And at that point in time, I didn't have any sense of history. I would just make up wild stories like this one was a vampire and this one was and we'd have a good time. And we'd play chase through there. All the stuff you're really not supposed to do. But we thought we were being careful and we never got hurt. Might have stubbed our toe or nicked a shin. And, once you do that once, you don't do it again. So we went inside and we were waiting for the girl, our little Girl Scout uniforms on. Maybe we were brownies actually at that point. And we were waiting for the leader to show up, and she didn't. But instead, the janitor shows up, and he's like, "What are you girls doing?" I'm like, "Oh, we're waiting for the Girl Scout meeting." He goes, "Oh, they moved it to this other room." And so we're walking down the hall with him, and he kind of puts his arm around us, and I just get this perv vibe from him. Like, I think there's something wrong with him, and it's, I don't have the words for it at 9. It's creepy. And so he says, "Here, girls, here's where the meeting is going to be." And he takes us into this room. Now, there were a couple scooters in there. And he goes, "You guys can play on the scooters." But he locks the door behind us when we go in. And then he goes over to this kind of closet. And anyway, it becomes apparent, I won't go into too much detail, that he wants to molest us. And so we know the door is locked, but we climb out a window. And it was luckily on the first floor, but when you're 9, it was still a bit of a jump. We had to jump into a bush and got kind of scratched up, and we got out, and he was yelling at us, "Come back, come back." But he couldn't get out the window. Luckily we did. And so then we just were like, "Oh my gosh, what do we do?" So we start leaving, and we're just walking home, kind of shaken up, like, I think someone tried to kidnap us. Well, he pulls up next to us in his car, and he flings the door open, and he pats the seat and goes, "Get in." And my friend just reflexively gets in because, when you're 9 and an adult tells you to do something, you're used to it. And I'm like, "Get out." I pull her out, and then she starts screaming. She told me later, like, she didn't know why it was just because he said get in. So she just obeyed. And then she freaked out, realizing, what am I doing? So we go running. We're like, to the cemetery. We both have the same idea. So we go running through the cemetery because he can't drive across the tombstones, which was smart on our part. And he gets out of his car and starts chasing us. And he's like, girls, come back here, come back. I just want you to live with me or something like that. We're like, oh my God. But we know how to run and zigzag. And he's like, ow, ooh, ah. And he's tripping and falling. I look back once and he's like, on the ground. And we know where there's a shortcut through the woods, and we made it through the woods, and that's how we kept from getting kidnapped, essentially.
Okay, so what happened? What happened to him?
Well, our parents didn't believe us. They said we were making it all up. We got in, I think I got the worst spanking of my life and was told I couldn't play with my friend anymore. It was very frustrating. I mean, it taught me that, I guess I can't tell the adults in my life what's really going on. And then we moved away shortly after. But I mean, and I always was kind of scared of janitors after that.
Jeez.
Like, I would hear the sound of keys. You know how they always have the sound of keys? And my stomach would twist. And I would always this is kind of funny. I mean, I never, ever after, I always wanted to have shoes on that I could run in. And I always, to this day, I kind of scope out the exits. Like, when I'm in a room, like, I sit so that I can see the exits, and I think of where I would run if someone were to, like, if I were to feel in peril. Like, so that was its lasting legacy. Like, I was never like, I want to wear high heels. I was like, can I run in these when I look at shoes? So, yeah.
All right, now I'm frustrated. Let's go back and we'll find that guy.
Yeah, I know. It's horrible, isn't it? It's just,
See how many skeletons he has in his closet that are only 4 feet high.
Oh, I know. Every time I would go to Girl Scouts after that, for a few months before we moved, she and I were always like hopefully, scared we would see him. We never did. Like, he never showed his face again when we were there, thank goodness. But we were like scared. Like, if one of us had to go to the bathroom during the, Girl Scout meeting, we're like, you bring the other with, it was like, ew.
The other kids ever, you tell any of the other kids, or just?
We told the other kids. The other kids believed us, but we didn't tell any other adults because we were like, they're not going to believe us. I don't know why we would make that up. I mean, it was scary.
I know. And that's the thing. This is my police brain kicking in again. Kids just don't make that up.
And we were scratched up. I mean, we were, and freaked out. I mean, it's not like, I don't know what that would have been a fun story to make up, what I would have gotten from it.
See, in my experience, adults will make stuff like that up. I should say adults, but like 16 to 20-year-olds will make that up. Oh, I'm late for my curfew. I'm going to say the cab driver molested me. Oh, yeah. And you end up investigating it, and the cab driver is saying, well, no, look, here's the video. This is the time I picked them up. This is the time I dropped them off. I could not have driven to where they said I was, and there's video. And then you sit down with the kid, and you stare at them, and eventually you say, well, I didn't want to get in trouble for being late. Okay, so you to avoid getting yelled at and having your curfew, slammed down a little bit harder, you claimed you were sexually assaulted by a stranger who now his life can be ruined. So they look at you like, oh yeah, I guess that's bad. Duh, yeah. So, yeah. And then and if you ever get sexually assaulted, holy cow, now look at the hill you have to climb. So, like when you call me and they say, I've been sexually assaulted. Oh, I remember you. Yeah. So we're going to have to really have a conversation here. And as well as really investigate a sexual assault. So it's like you can't just write it off at the beginning. You have to investigate it like it's a sexual assault right up to the point when you find out it isn't. But it puts the victim into an awkward position if they've already had a fake one. And, and it obviously puts the accused through a ringer, which can be devastating. And it's a lot of it's psychologically devastating. All of a sudden, you've got persons of authority claiming that you've done something. So, it's just bizarre. Yeah, absolutely crazy. But it's like, but like kid, like a 9-year-old's not going to make that up, especially two of them.
No, I mean, we were mischievous, and we would like make prank phone calls or something. We were very mischievous, but I mean, we would nothing like we were going to accuse an adult of something. Like, I wouldn't even have that in my head to think of to do.
And that's the thing is, it's not what you're not doing at 9 is targeting another person with something that's painful. Yeah. Like claiming they've done something. You will do things, like you say, mischievously. You will make a prank phone call, is your refrigerator running? You better catch it, kind of thing. Those are fine because it's not, what's the term? It's not an offensive.
Not malicious or something. Yeah, even our pranks were never meant to be malicious. They were just meant to, like, kind of just goose people into like, oh, what just happened? It was like a funny thing. Yeah. I mean, I think we had just missed, they had said that the meeting was canceled and we didn't realize it because we were probably goofing around or something. 9 years old. I didn't hear that it was, that's the only crime I committed that day was just going there when there was no Girl Scout meeting. I mean, how dare you? But it was so weird. My husband and I drove through Blacksburg, Virginia, and I had not been to that cemetery since I was like 9, and I still knew my way around. I was like, oh yeah, oh my gosh, this is where we ran. Oh my gosh. And we were only there. We were kind of in a hurry because there were going to be tornadoes that day on our drive, so we couldn't stay very long. I would like to go back again though and walk through again. Maybe apologize to some of the tombs where I made up stories about them being vampires and stuff, but
I don't think they really care.
Probably not.
It's hard. We're talking to Tui Snider. Go to our website, tuisnider.com, and Tui is T-U-I, and Snider is without a Y. So Snider, tuisnider.com, and check out Tui's other books. They're kind of cool. We got off on this tangent, but I was asking you
the original question. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the original question. What's the capital of Ecuador? No, what types of we'll call it paranormal, supernatural, woo-woo stuff that you kind of bumped into in your experiences walking through cemeteries. Now, I always look at a cemetery in this light. If you're a ghost, why would you hang around a cemetery? It's quiet. There's a bunch of dead people. Actually, no, there's a bunch of the remains of human beings in boxes 6 feet under. Why would you even hang out there? So
yes, and that's exactly the way I felt about it. And like when I wrote my book, Paranormal Texas, I do have some haunted cemeteries in there. That's a travel book to places that are, I wanted to make a travel guide that would take you to places where paranormal activity has been reported fairly regularly, and seems like there's some historic basis to it. It's a place you can legally go because people, you watch these ghost shows and you're like, okay, I just bought a K2 meter, or I got a neat digital recorder, I want to go somewhere. Well, where can you go and like without having to join a paranormal group and go at 3 a.m.? I wanted places people could go as sort of a family activity. Hey, let's go to this haunted park and, just get people out. Like I know I'm getting off. I will get back to the topic here, but I do want to say a big reason that I write the books I do, and I think one thing that kind of unites my books is that I want people to I want them to unplug from their screens and spend some time with their friends and family, getting out and exploring the area right around them and having some of their own adventures rather than always feeling like you have to have vicarious ones. So this is, I'm always happy. I'm always thinking maybe my book is going to take someone on an adventure. Even an armchair adventure, but just kind of get them going places. Now, I always thought that cemeteries, that's the wrong place. Why would I haunt a cemetery? Why? I really had a real resistance to the idea of cemeteries being haunted. And so I was writing this book, Paranormal Texas, and it does have a few haunted cemeteries in them. And I was just like, well, I will report these, even though I'm kind of rolling my eyes secretly because I think, this would be the last place that you would hang out. Like my favorite kind of ghost in those books are the ghost of the bakery, the haunted bakery, and it's haunted by the old baker who just loved it so much that he can't leave it. When someone loves their business so much that after they've departed, I've got a haunted hat store where that happens. There's haunted theaters. Okay, I get that. Well, I had ended up having an experience in Mineral Wells and Elmwood Cemetery that kind of made me eat crow because I had a little paranormal experience there, and I finally had to think about it. And I do have a theory as to why cemeteries are haunted. I guess I'll tell you the theory first. I noticed that the places where people report the most paranormal experiences, random people, not people who are setting out to have a paranormal experience, but someone who they just happen to have one. It's usually bookstores, libraries, cemeteries, museums after hours. And I was thinking, what do these places have in common? And they're places where we shut up, we quiet our minds, which we, I think, do less and less now that we have something to always fill that void. We're scrolling Facebook or Instagram or not really quieting our minds. It's rude to be on your phone in these situations usually. Or like if you're at a bookstore, you're actually quiet because you're trying to find a book. And then, that's when people will say like, oh, this book jumped off the shelf, or I felt a tap on my shoulder. So anyway, flash forward. I was in Mineral Wells with our mutual friend, Teal Gray, who is a psychic medium. And she told me, well, more than once, when I've gone to visit her, she has noticed that I had the spirits of little children around me. And like one time I went to visit her and she goes, you have a little entourage with you. What is going on? Where were you? And I'm like, oh, I was just at this little pioneer cemetery. She's like, well, you brought some of them back with you. And I'm like, oh, all right. So she kind of cleared them away from me. So she teases me about my little, entourage of child spirits. And we were wandering around Elmwood, and we wanted to fulfill some photo requests for Find a Grave. Do you ever go to that website?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. And so people will have photo requests. They want a photo of this or that grave. I don't think we found anybody on the list, but we were running around. So she goes, hey, Tui, go check out that. I want you to read the epitaph. And she points at this one headstone. And so I walk over there by myself, and I see the name on there, somebody Diker Koff or something, some sort of German name. And I'm like, huh. And the epitaph just read, the orphan's true friend. And I'm like, wow. And so I'm hunkering down to take a photo of this one. And as I'm, lining it up, trying to get some good lighting on the headstone, I hear some children giggling. And to me, it sounded like 3 little kids giggling distinctly, kind of about 10 feet forward to the right. And in my mind's eye, I could see them, too. I saw little kids, which in retrospect, was interesting, that whole mind's eye thing. Because a lot of times when I get little flashes in my mind's eye, I discount it. But then later on, someone will describe someone who lived there. And I'm like, oh, I should be paying more attention to these mind's eye things. Anyway, I stand up and I'm fully expecting to see some kids there. And I don't. And I heard one more little and I'm looking as I'm walking over there, and I just get big old goosebumps, and I realize, wow, I just got punked. Okay, so I guess, cemeteries can be haunted. I've had a paranormal experience now. I can't just roll my eyes at them. For whatever reason, I always say cemeteries are for the living, because they're for us. That's why they are there. They're meant to be visited, but still, now I do say that, okay, they can be haunted just as much as any other place. I don't think they're any more haunted than other places.
No, they're not. And I said that very definitely, didn't I? No, they're not.
I loved it. I loved that.
Yeah, no, it's what I found over time, and not that I'm that old, but I'm damn old. And
we're not vampires yet.
No, not yet. What I found is when you go into a cemetery, and again, my belief system is there's no ghosts in a cemetery. But when you walk up to a tombstone and you read the name, they come by and say, "You calling me?"
Yeah, you rang.
And I don't mean. Now, and this is the difference between a ghost and a spirit. Like, I think if someone's dead and they cross over and they go on to do whatever they want, they can come back and they can hang out in their favorite bar, or they can do whatever. It's those beings, that energy that shows up. Because if you died in Alaska, but you were buried in Arlington, Texas, you were a ghost hanging out in the bar that you died in Alaska, you're not going to be at your cemetery. You just, like, that energy is somewhere else because you haven't crossed over, haven't gone through what you have to go through and show up. But when you read the names on a tombstone, you could have, somebody could have died 100 years ago.
It's like an invocation.
Yeah. And you've just basically said, okay, hey, this one's Bob Smith, who died of a gunshot wound in 1870. And Bob Smith shows up and saying, do you know me?
You
like,
rang.
Who are you? Why are you interested in me? Why are you saying my name? And why are you standing at my grave? And they're coming back because they're curious on, like, okay, why? Did you have a question? And some people who are sensitive will go, oh, crap, there's a ghost here, or I'm getting a name, or whatever. The other ones that hang out at cemeteries, though, bless them, are kids who haven't crossed over because they hang out with their family and their bodies, and they end up jumping in the cars, going to this funeral, and then everybody just splits up and goes home. And the kids are going, okay, what am I doing here? And okay, we're going to wait here because mom and dad will eventually die and have to come here.
Oh, wow.
So there's that theory too. But speaking of kids and Arlington, Texas, in your book, 6 Feet Under Texas, you talk about the Reverend Upchurch is the, what's it called? The Industrial Home for Redemption of Girls or something?
A very clunky, the Baraka Industrial Home for the Redemption and Protection of Erring Girls, I think.
Yes.
And that they call it the Baraka Institute. It kind of had a few different incarnations of the name. Yeah.
Yeah, the industrial home or industrial school, those were the places where you'd, it was the name for a juvenile detention facility or a juvenile facility for people who were, quote unquote, weren't sick, but they were taken from home or they were pulled from home to put somebody in. Now, this place was, I guess, built back at the turn of the century for homeless or usually pregnant women from Texas and the surrounding states.
Yeah.
But it was interesting because this was a place, unlike other homes for the fallen women, this one required the girls to keep their babies, and they weren't given up for adoption.
Well, they were eventually, but they had to keep them for a year, which I would think would be so tough because after a year, you've totally bonded. But he wrote essays about the importance of the mother's love. And so, like, if you had to keep your baby for a year. I don't know if you would be allowed to keep her or him, but at that point you could then give the child up for adoption. So they were not adopting out infants. I mean, they were still a year old, but I thought that was interesting too.
Yeah, because it was hard to be a single mom back then because you were ostracized in the community as being a single mother.
Yes.
Unless you could justify by saying, "Oh, my husband was killed in the in the war or whatever," but you'd have to. Even
you'd have to fake it somehow.
Yeah, You'd be the widow so and so, but it wasn't the way it actually. I would say the way it is, but I remember in high school, one of the girls I went to high school with, her sister went quote unquote to Europe for a year.
Oh,
when she was 16 or 15 or 16. And
wow.
Came back. And we kind of deduced that, no, she was off having a baby.
Wow.
But, yeah, and there was one of those places in Vancouver, British Columbia, too. It was like a juvenile facility for girls. And bless them, a lot of them weren't like promiscuous girls who at the age of 15 or 16 were fooling around with the farm boy who was 15 or 16. Their children were their parent. Like they were having their sisters and brothers. Mm-hmm. Their dads were raping them. Their uncles were raping them. They were victims of sexual abuse. And when they became pregnant, it was, okay, you're a horrible little girl. You're going to have to go. You have to leave the house.
Yeah, you're a fallen woman. That was what got me. Even, as I was researching this guy and the Reverend, who it seemed that he really had his heart in a good place, compared for the era anyway. But he would still refer to them as fallen women, and he would, the whole point of the Baraka Institute was to give them a skill. I like this so that they could return employable skills. So you go to this home. I don't know what alibi you give your family. You've just been kicked out, and who knows? But you might become a laundress, or I liked it. They had a magazine, so they had typesetting and printing were some of the skills that you could get, and they had their own magazine called a Purity Journal. Actually, seen a couple copies of it now at the University of UTA's museum, and they're pretty dire. Like they have really dramatic illustrations in there, like showing a big spider that's coming for you with a bottle of booze, or the temptations of the world and sin and all this and that. So it was definitely infused with a lot of religion. But the fact was, and then if you were one of these women and your child did not survive because infant mortality was so high back then, in the cemetery, you'll just see numbers. So it'll say like infant number 6 or twins number 4. And that was so the mother could visit the grave, but it protected her anonymity. She could then go back into society, be a laundress or work as for a printer or whatever else. No one would know her, her shameful secret, which, as you mentioned, was probably, or quite often could have just been that she was raped. But, this allowed her to return to proper society and, live out her life without that shadow of shame over her. So I guess it gave them, it's such a different time.
Yeah. And a lot of them were homeless or runaway, quote unquote, runaways, which it happens today when a child is brought up being sexually abused by a family member. They'll run away when they're 10, 12, 13, 14 and find themselves on the street and most likely navigating towards drug, alcohol abuse and in the sex trade. Yeah. Sex trade worker, because they have no other. They perceive themselves as that's all they are made for, is that, and being abused. It's a horrible, horrible thing. And it's funny. A friend and I talked about this one day. We were riding motorcycles through South Dakota in Deadwood, thinking, God, it'd be so cool to live back in the day and the cowboys and stuff like that. And I said, yeah, really? You really think living a life with no toilet paper and like carrying a rag with you to clean yourself, and then have to find fresh water to clean that rag once or twice a day, and stinking, and you think there wasn't serial killers and sex abuse and pedophiles back then? It was horrible. It was, you'd go to some guy. It was just bizarre. And I was a Mountie in northern Canada, northern Alberta, and the rural areas out there, it was like going back 100 years. There was like
sense of lawlessness.
It was very, very bizarre. It was bizarre. It was incestuous in some little communities. A group of Eastern Europeans had a settlement up there, and they were now in the early 90s were just marrying people outside of the community. So I remember this.
Wow.
I'm going to go off on a tangent here. It's nothing to do with paranormal or anything, but it's a
no, go on. I love to hear your experiences.
It was a New Year's Eve. This guy had just got home and he was drunk. He was out drinking with all his buddies, and his wife, who had come from England, she was living in there in a little double wide trailer. He came home and she gave him crap for being drunk, coming home drunk at 1 o'clock in the morning. And he punched her in the face. And she pushed him back and called the police. And I went down and arrested him for domestic violence, handcuffed him, put him back to the police car, and all the way back to the, which is like a half hour, 40-minute drive, was him threatening to kill me as soon as I took the handcuffs off. And, you just want to sleep with my wife and blah, blah, blah. I'm looking at him thinking, yeah, your wife's kind of cute, but no, that's not right. and he got him to jail. It was like a Friday or Saturday night, and he was going to have to go to court on Monday, and just got him booked. And the doorbell at the little detachment I worked at rang, and I went out the front, opened it, and there was his mother, his father, and his grandmother were there. And I said, Can I help you? And they said, we're coming to pick up our son. And I said, well, he's not getting out. He's got to go to court Monday morning. And they just stared at me. And I said, you know what he did, right? He punched his wife in the face. And the mother and father didn't say a thing, but the grandmother said, well, it's his wife. At that point, I realized, that's where he gets it from. Because mom and dad probably beats mom. Grandma got beat by grandpa because they were the property of the male in the family.
Jeez.
It was a very interesting Eastern European group that were incestuous, beating, violent, and I would rather just work on the Indian Reserve, where if you said, hey, did you steal that car, the guy would go, yeah, but I needed to ride home. I said, okay, fine. But and if you were a real jerk on the reserve, the band council, we call them bands in Canada. The council will come to your house and say, Billy has to leave, he's being an idiot. So they punt them off the reserve. We also call them reserves, not reservations. So it was very peaceful. They're all farmers, and they fed me from one end to the other. You drive onto the reserve, and you just ate from one end to the other. But this Eastern European, I called it the Ukrainian Reserve. It was north of town. It was bizarre. It was absolutely racist, and even the other people from that culture, southern, like around Edmonton, Alberta, could not stand those ones. They were like banished back 75, 80 years ago when they found a settlement up there, and they were crazy.
Wow.
And anyway, that's me on a tangent in regards to and those crazy people. But what I found, and again, it had really nice cemeteries out there, and they were old. They go back to the 1800s and settlers and 1860s, 1870s, and the church came up there and they started trying to civilize the area, which unfortunately didn't go over well. But But their cemeteries, they had some pretty skookum cemeteries there too. But like you talk about in your book, and we talked about earlier, the headstones back in the day were made out of, a lot of them were just planks. And may have had a lot of detail on them for the 6 or 7 or 8 years they existed before they rotted because of snow, wind, rain, whatever.
And sometimes they get thrown away by like people coming to quote unquote clean up the cemetery later on. It's like, oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah, in the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, we've got people who had died, in the Northwest Rebellion, going back in the 1870s, 1880s. These guys were on horseback in the prairies and got into a skirmish or died, or a lot of them fell off a horse crossing a river, that kind of thing. And those graves are out there. They were buried on site.
Oh, yeah.
There's a rule in the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Those all have to be upkept.
Wow.
So there's chunks of land in the southern prairies where there's like all of a sudden out of the middle of nowhere in a field is a grave.
That's
and
really
it's kept up. It's the grass is kept, and they the tombstone is it's kept up, and the rocks around the grave are all painted, and
you could do a historic hike, make a map of like a historic hike to go visit several of these. It'd be like a neat little map or a neat little, I don't know, travel excursion.
Oh, yeah, it wouldn't be a good hike if you think of it as being northwest Texas to southeast Texas until you get to
really
the next
grueling.
one.
That would
it'd be a trek. It would be more a trek than a hike.
It reminds me of the Barefoot Mailmen of Florida. Have you ever heard of them?
No.
Yeah. Okay. So there's this stretch of coast down it's the east coast of Florida, and they had these mailmen who would deliver. They would be barefoot because that was the only way to pass through all the rough, when you visit Florida, and you're not on a boardwalk, and you imagine walking through the undergrowth there. It's crazy. Like up in the Northwest, the undergrowth is a lot more passable in many areas than the undergrowth in Florida. So these guys were just totally badass. They would do things like they'd have the mail, and I think each of them had to walk maybe 11 miles or so. It might have been more, but whatever it was very grueling. And they would, some of them lost their lives. Like one of them, they would have to do things like, okay, you at one point, you're going through quicksand, you're going along the beach, then you hand deliver the mail. It'd take them like a week to do their route. And one of them I know of, at one spot, he was used to taking a little boat across. Well, someone had borrowed the boat, so he had to swim, and they just found him. They think he was eaten by a shark or an alligator. They weren't sure. But I mean, these guys were being eaten by things. They were just totally, anyway, I went to the museum there, and they had why doesn't more people know about the Barefoot Mailman? I think there's like a movie in the waiting for that. I think it's quite interesting.
Yeah, they were. They didn't know about it because they were all killed off.
Yeah.
I've been to Florida. I've been through the Everglades, and Lord, I'm not going to go barefoot anywhere near there. I would wear thigh-length boots.
Exactly. Gaiters up to your chest. Yeah.
Good Lord. It'd be like walking barefoot in Australia. Everything there will kill you.
Yeah.
Bugs, snakes, your neighbor. It's just a creepy place.
Oh, but here's something
barefoot.
Here's something funny about so you got Australia where like everything's venomous and out to get you, and I did go to a cemetery there. Had a couple cemeteries there. Had an interesting time, and I was always looking down. And I told my Australian friend, he goes, "Oh, well, you should have been looking up. There were like these tree bats that could follow you, and they're venomous too." I'm like, what? I mean, every which direction. Meanwhile, in New Zealand, which is not that far away, right? I mean, when you look at the entire globe. When I was there, I was shocked by how many people I saw walking barefoot. And I saw a guy jogging barefoot. These are, not just kids. It was adults, too, just walking, not in the main city. But once you got out to neighborhoods, people were walking around barefoot. And I saw a guy jogging. I saw a person just out in their lawn with their kid, and they were barefoot. And I asked the tour guide, and she goes, "Oh, yeah, it's a Kiwi thing. We like to go barefoot." And nothing there is venomous. So I guess, you can go barefoot there.
They banished them all to Australia.
And they don't even litter. Like there was no litter. It was so clean there. I mean, I'm glad. It was just an amazing place. It looked like go ahead.
I was in Fiji, and the native Fijians are barefoot most of the time.
Ah.
And as a result of not wearing shoes in their life, their feet are giant.
Really?
They're like wide. And I'm looking at this guy's feet. I said, like, Sammy, do you ever wear shoes? He goes, no, I've never had a pair of shoes.
Wow.
Like,
Isn't that
why?
something?
And good Lord, man, it's like that. Mind you, he was also like 6'5", but it's and so were the girls, which was fascinating.
Wow.
The girls were all super, super tall, really tall, beautiful women. But but I was also in an area where there's a lot of villagers too, so they were like
neat.
Traditional village. Yeah, we don't. It was kind of funny. They were giving some tourist crap for coming in wearing a t-shirt and bikini bottom, riding a horse.
Oh.
Because she was showing her thighs. So these women were very upset. The topless women with the long dresses were very upset because you're showing thighs and my children could see that. And I'm thinking,
oh, wow.
You're topless. But that's
That
okay.
is
Totally different culture. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. That was not only my experience.
Now that we're talking about the South Pacific, I did get to go to Rarotonga. And one thing that was really interesting there is that people often have a raised tomb or two in their front yard, like their family plot. They're allowed to just bury people in their front yard. And so they'll have like a nice little picnic table and all this and that set up, and they'll just have there's a tomb right over there. And I was talking to them about that, and they're like, yeah, that's just, we keep our dead with us. We're very family oriented. It was just, that's a very different take on it.
Yeah, I've seen the word they I think it was, I don't know if it was Rarotonga or not, but it was in the South Pacific. They had the mausoleum or the little raised tombs in the yard, and they had tables. So they would have their meals with their family.
Yeah, that was exactly what they were doing in Rarotonga. Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. I see that we're not allowed to do that. Every so often you find a cemetery here that from back in the day when you were allowed to bury people on your land.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you can't, they don't want you, well, really, you can't really move them now. I think there's one cemetery in the city of Vancouver here in British Columbia, and oh my God, 30 years ago, it was $10,000 for a plot. Because the price of real estate's gone up. So you're not going to dig up Uncle Fred, who was in the backyard here, and let's go bury him in no, we can't afford that. We're going to put him back.
Wow.
We want to build a shed and a garage. Well, you know what? We can't. The other thing is you can't move them too. So if they are on your land and you are going to, you want to put in a driveway, it's like, no, we can't move. As soon as you bring him up, you got to move him somewhere else to a real cemetery. So that grave is historic, and that's it. It's you've been grandfathered with your grandfather.
Yeah.
And you're not going to be able to move him. But the Reverend Upchurch and that facility that he was trying, they were helping the little girls out. That's very common to have that cemetery full of infants and like the mothers who have died in childbirth. Yeah. And not labeling the graves primarily to keep the young woman's purity. So no one's going to say, well, that's little baby Jane Smith, and hold on, we know her mother. Yeah. Oh, she had a baby. It's like, dude, move on. But the remains are there back there. In your experience, when did this whole cremation thing really pick up? Did you get anything in your, you've been to cemeteries all over the planet, but when did you start bumping into more of the crematoriums?
It's interesting because, in the Victorian era, to have an urn on top of your grave was a very common symbol, and they really loved that because ancient Greek warriors would be cremated in, but the Victorians did not want to be cremated because there was still that belief that you were going to need your parts at Judgment Day. It seems kind of maybe in the last 50 years. I mean, I was asking the memorial when I gave that talk at the Memorial Builders Conference, and they were saying, yeah, I was asking them, like, have you seen an uptick in cremation? They were like, not as much as you would think, maybe because we're down here in Texas. This was the Southern Monument Builders Conference that I was at. But yeah, I don't really see that. I must say that the Great Depression had a real impact on cemeteries. The Civil War had a huge impact on cemeteries, and because the Civil War, we lost more lives than any other conflict we've had since or before. So pretty much every single person in America was mourning the loss of somebody. So there was a lot of impact from that. And also because so many people died, that's when you get the mass production of caskets and coffins, which before that you either made them yourself and used them as bookshelves until you passed, or the furniture store made them and there wasn't such a big demand. That's when embalming became a thing. So Civil War was a big thing. But the other big impact that I've noticed was the Great Depression, because people had to leave their little towns and their close-knit family communities and just find work wherever they could. And so they were no longer the local cemetery was no longer kind of a focal point of at least a once yearly gathering of a family reunion. They call it a decoration day or reunion day, and you would have it at the cemetery. So once that was people were no longer around to, if I'm no longer living close enough to come home and tend Grandpa's grave. And when I look in old newspaper articles, they would say stuff. Even if you moved away, it'd be like, Miss Tui Snider has come back from Omaha to tend Grandpa's grave. There'd be, this, how you see it in the newspapers even. But know that there was a big shift to let's turn cemeteries into big expanses of lawn that we can mow, and a stranger is going to be tending the graves, essentially. So that was a big shift. And after that, there was a lot of like, well, what is, I guess philosophical shift, and I can't really pin that on any one thing, but people think about it, they want to be cremated for a lot of different reasons. They're not into the church as much. Maybe they don't feel attached to their body in the same way as we used to. Oh, my body, I'm going to need it after I'm gone. Now people are like, burn me up and scatter my ashes in some spot. So I guess I can't put a date on it, but I see a shift now where people are trying to find ways to be buried that aren't negatively impacting the environment, which I think is great. I'm a big fan of the garden cemeteries, which I talked about a lot in my Understanding Cemetery Symbols book, because garden cemeteries, do you mind if I go off about them a little bit?
No, go.
Okay, here we go. Okay, so garden cemeteries, they came about in the 1830s, and they were inspired by that famous cemetery that I haven't been to in Paris, Père Lachaise, where like Jim Morrison and Oscar Wilde is buried, and it was a real change, because up until then, everyone wanted to be buried in the churchyard in town. But, when you get a heavy rain, like we're getting down in South Texas right now, hurricanes, yikes. Anyway, heavy rain, flooding, and you run out of room. So bodies would spill into the streets. And even though they didn't have a good idea of what germs were all about, still a stinking body, rotting corpse, no, you kind of know that's not a healthy thing. So Paris finally decided, hey, let's make a burial ground outside of the city limits, and we'll call it a cemetery, and it will be a beautiful place, wandering, like a place to go visit, and with sculpture. It'll be like a sculpture garden. So we copied that in the United States, and Mount Auburn Cemetery in like the 1830s outside of Boston area, they created America's first garden cemetery. And it's still, you should Google the pictures. It's beautiful. It is truly a garden, not like when they say Memorial Park and really all you see is grass. It's like a garden cemetery. They have glorious trees and vistas, and it's planned by architects. And people would go there on the weekends, and they would have picnics, and there'd be portrait painters there. It'd be like a very festive scenario. People would be mourning, but they'd kind of, in a way, like mourning fashion to the people who were mourning, to see and be seen. But also people who just wanted a nice day in nature. Those were actually America's first public parks. And then over time, we realized, hey, we could just have a park. It doesn't have to have dead people buried there. And I'm simplifying all of this. But But I really love those old ones, the garden cemeteries. I think that they are living libraries. Like some of them have such old plants that they have achieved arboretum status. And that is cool because we do lose some of those old plants. Like I remember the first time I ordered a rose out of a catalog and it came and it had no smell. And I'm like, what is the deal? Shakespeare would be so offended if there's no odor. So anyway, I think that in that way, our cemeteries are actually like living libraries with these old plants in them, and they can really be a place of life. But when my time comes, I don't want to be put in some sort of sealed coffin that's going to, poison the ground. I like the idea of something green, so you go back to the earth. So I do see a lot of shift, and when I talk to people, a lot of times what they want to do is something that isn't going to negatively impact the environment. But go ahead.
Oh, there's a lot of dead people around right now as a result of cremation and literally getting your loved one's remains in the mail and thinking, well, I'm going to go spread them out at this park, at the beach, their golf course. My God, I don't know how many dead people at golf courses now. Grandpa used to golf, so we're going to go out to the 18th hole, and we're going to, that sand trap that he always had problems with, we're going to, that kind of thing. But you're not allowed to. Like, technically, you're not supposed to do that.
Yeah.
But that's just technically you're not supposed to do that. And what we found, and this is the policing thing again, when you cremate a body, not all of it burns to ash. And the ashes aren't really fluffy like you'd see like burning a newspaper in a fireplace. It's pretty coarse stuff, and your teeth a lot of times don't completely burn. So people out like the gardener at the local golf club will be digging through and find human teeth and think, oh my God, what's going on here? And then you come out and say, no, it's like somebody's ashes were sprinkled there, and that piece of tooth just happens to be there. At the beach or at a theater.
That's interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that with the teeth. Oh, wow. Well, I have had more than one friend who has gone up in the Northwest. They are like, we went out onto the San Juan Islands, onto the ferry, and we went to throw, Marty's ashes and they don't take into account the wind. The wind blew back. Marty blows back in their face and they get it in their mouth. Yeah. So always pay attention to the wind when you do that.
Yes, and I did my father had sprinkled my mother's ashes off a pier in the Pacific Ocean here, in a beach called White Rock, which of course.
White Rock's nice.
Yeah, so they he sprinkles, and I wasn't there when he did it. So I said, "Where would you like your ashes sprinkled if you ever passed?" He goes, just take me down to the old pier in White Rock. Well, there's two piers there. There's one that's old. It's the old pier where he sprinkled my mother's ashes off, and then there's the old pier, which is just a bunch of pylons in the water. So I went, yeah, okay, that would be the one. So I asked a psychic later. I said, how did I do? And she said, you sprinkled his ashes at the wrong pier. What? First of all, how did you know I sprinkled the ashes at a pier? But psychics.
Yeah.
And I said, well, what do you mean the wrong pier? I said, is it okay? He says, yeah, it's good. Because once, his living brain said, this is where I'd like to go. But his dead brain's like, yeah, I don't really care. It's like, it's up to you. It's got nothing to do with me. It all works out at the end.
I'm beyond that now.
We don't have to worry about that anymore. But it was kind of weird. It's like, dude, ashes. So there I'm out there with this box, of ashes, and I'm sprinkling them. I'm throwing them in the ocean as the tide's going out. And some is sinking and some is floating, and it's like this big kind of gray cloud in the water.
Yeah.
And people are walking by looking at me down further, and I'm thinking, okay, just stay over there. Don't come here. You'll probably figure out what I'm doing if you got closer. So this is grossing me out at the same time as I'm trying to follow my father's last wishes here, which is awkward. But every time I go to White Rock now, I go, Mom and Dad were here at one point. Because they used to like it. They lived down there, and they used to like going for walks in the sunset and, do all that living kind of stuff down there.
Yeah. Well, I have an ashes cemetery. Sorry, I was interrupting.
I'm going to talk about you. We're talking to Tui Snider. Go to her website, tuisnider.com. She is the author of Understanding Cemetery Symbols, 100 Things to Do in Dallas, Fort Worth Before You Die, and Paranormal Texas. And the book we're talking about today is 6 Feet Under Texas. And what we're talking, that's how we started talking. And then we've gone off on multiple tangents because that's what we do when I talk to Tui.
Definitely. I know you reminded me when you were mentioning the ashes. I just have to say, I was moving into a new apartment and I was unpacking a bunch of stuff. And I was like, what's this? I never buy this brand of yogurt. It was a very sturdy plastic yogurt container. And I open it up and I'm like, what's this? It's Mount St. Helens ash or something? I don't know what it is. I'm poking it around with my fingers. I was just like, just going to put some... I don't know. I was like, maybe should I taste it? What the heck is this? The phone rings and it's my friend and she's like, oh my gosh, I forgot to tell you that I gave you a little bit of our friend's ashes when I was helping you pack. And I'm like, yeah. So I'm sitting there poking my finger around it. But then we just burst out laughing because our friend had such a sense of humor. I mean, he would have thought this was hilarious. So it was kind of perfect in its own way. But
kind of bizarrely.
It was horrifying, and I, was laughing from horror as well as just the absurdity of it.
Yeah, that's kind of creepy.
Exactly.
My uncle, my father's oldest brother, passed, and my dad was in charge of his estate, and his remains were mailed to the door.
Yeah.
And it was in a box, and I picked it up, and I started shaking the box and wondering what the heck was in it. It was coming from a funeral home, and I thought, this is really weird. I wonder if they are sending his watch or whatever. So I'm rattling this thing. It was quite heavy. I'm shaking it and everything, and my dad get home and goes, oh, that's your Uncle Jim. I went, jeez. What do you mean? It's my Uncle Jim. Oh, that's his cremains. I went, okay, that's...
Wow.
I shook him up pretty good, so hopefully he knows how to put himself back together when he gets to wherever he's going. Oh yeah, we mail human beings. See, that's the other thing too. Is you talk about we go back to the Depression. Mm-hmm. You travel from California to wherever to find a job, and you die that far away from home. How much does it cost to find a coffin and and ship you home?
Yeah.
During the Depression, that might have been $10 or $20. Where, okay, how about we just burn you up, put you in a box, and mail you? Okay, that's $1. So
mail you. That's true.
Yeah, we can
so that might
ship you off. So we may have increased that a bit too. Mm-hmm. So, I happen to look up. You remember telling me about that cemetery in Havana, Cuba?
Oh yeah,
Necropolis de Colon. It's one of the largest cemeteries in the world, and it has approximately 2 million people buried in its 53,360 plots, many of which are dedicated to families and organizations. Originally designed by the Spanish architect Calixto de Loria and laid out between 1871 and 1886. Still today is a national monument, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, it's a huge, it is a monster. It's comparable to this Lachaise cemetery in Paris.
Oh, Père Lachaise? Oh,
yes, it's comparable. It's the second largest in the world. This one, so it's crazy. It was, but it's one of those things. When you take a tour of that cemetery, it's a full day. Mm-hmm. It's like walking through a city. Yeah. And again, it's mausoleums. Everything's above ground, and beautiful artwork back in the 1800s. It was crazy, but 2 million people.
Oof. Yeah.
That's take 2 lunches. It's going to take you.
That's right.
Oh, you can't go there. Sorry, I forgot. You're American.
That's right. I can't go there.
Well, you can't. There was a lot of not a lot. There was Americans down there when I was in Cuba. There's a Veradero. There's a real touristy area, and it's a lot of the hotels are Spanish, like they're owned by Spain, Spanish companies. And there were a few Americans, mostly Germans, Russians, Eastern European, not all Eastern Europeans, but Europeans, and Canadians, British, Australians, that kind of thing. But the Americans that were there, they would fly to Mexico, and they'd fly from Mexico over.
Oh, that's how they work it? Ah.
Sorry, my dogs are going insane here.
Oh, sorry.
That's they would take off that way. And also, you're not allowed to have a stamp in your passport that says Cuba.
Really?
So what the Cuban government, the Americans side of things, like your customs, if they flip through your passport and see a Cuban stamp, then you're hauled off to why are you in a communist country, and did you catch anything, or are you bringing it back?
Wow.
And so what they do, the Cubans do, they give you a piece of paper you put in your passport, and they stamp the paper.
Wow.
So when you come back home, you can throw the paper away.
Oh, I'd keep it as a souvenir.
Yes, most people do. It's kind of cool to get a Cuban stamp. Being a policeman in the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, because it's a federal government police force, back in the day, you would have to actually write a memo on why you were traveling to a communist country, whether you're to Russia, China, or Cuba. And it got to the point that it just became such a tourism place, you would go through the process over the phone. For Cuba, I think you still have to write a letter to go to Russia or communist China, but you would just do it over the phone, and they'd say, you got to leave, you can't tell anybody you're a policeman, you got to leave your badge and ID at home, you aren't allowed to share talk to the local police and say, hey, here's a shoulder patch or whatever, that kind of thing. You can't tell anyone you're a policeman. And one of the things they say, and you promise not to pick up a prostitute. And I was like, okay, these are the rules? So you actually have to say them out loud? And she said, what do you think? I was like, okay, fine. Because you open yourself up for blackmail. Oh, you work for the federal government? Okay, we caught you with this prostitute. We're going to now tell your boss unless you give us the recipe to bear claws or something. I don't know. It's maple syrup recipe Canadian.
Yeah. That's what I was hoping to get from you.
Later. I'm retired now. We can pass that information on.
That's right.
It's not that secret. Yes. It's kind of an interesting place to go. And a lot of us, we were kind of choked because your last administration was going to open it up for Americans to go to Cuba. And we were kind of choked because we people who've gone to Cuba don't want a Starbucks on every corner and a McDonald's. So we would rather they didn't open it up for business in the U.S. So it's still old. It's like a very old place. It's very interesting. They still have the federal police keeping you away from the citizenry. They don't want you going for dinner at somebody's house and having them cook for you. And when you tip the hotel staff, we get a lecture when you get to Cuba.
You do?
There's the Canadian person at the hotel comes up and they say, okay, just so you know, this is how it works in Cuba. You are in a communist country. Everyone has to, okay, we understand. It's sunny and there's beaches and everything looks really nice. You are in a communist country. And when you tip the maid, $10 or whatever, remember a dentist here or a doctor, what was back in the day, a doctor makes $25 US a month.
Oh my gosh.
And you are tipping a maid in your hotel $10 a week. And that's just you, not on top of all the other people who are tipping this person. So if you think the grounds of the hotel are really well kept, why don't you tip the groundskeepers?
Oh, I see.
Spread it around. Bit. Yeah. And a lot of the times what you do is you take gifts to the hotel staff, like literally toothpaste, perfume, certain products that, because if you gave the person money, they wouldn't spend it on themselves anyway. That goes right to their family, because their family's poor. So you'd give them something for them, like lipstick and makeup and stuff.
I did that in Mexico. I packed my suitcase full of cool clothes that I got at the thrift store, like neat T-shirts, and I know they like the Chicago Bulls and stuff, and just all sorts of different, nice clothes, but what I could afford because I didn't have tons either. And then I just handed them out, and then they were giving me like, oh, here, have a necklace in return. But I was just, it was fun just to be like, hey, what do you want? What would you like? What's fun for you? I know some people will take cigarettes or things like that. I didn't do that, but I just brought a lot of clothes, and then, I just emptied my suitcase. It was fun.
Yeah, then filled it up with knickknacks and brought it home.
Yeah.
Velvet paintings and bowls. And yeah, we had a federale Mexican policeman come up. They were going through a training program up here and interviewing techniques and things, which they thought were fascinating that we didn't beat people.
Oh, really?
It's like, why would people even talk to you if you don't beat them?
Yeah, wow.
Okay, then you and I have to have a long talk. Anyway, this kid was ex-military because they cleaned. He showed me the top 100 people wanted in Mexico. Mm-hmm. And there was a poster, and more than half of them were in police uniforms.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, this is why they basically brought. I'm a federal policeman now because I was a pilot in the Air Force, but they ran out of. They basically fired and arrested most of the federal police.
Wow.
So anyway, when he was up, his big thing before he went home was he went to the Sears outlet store and bought blue jeans.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I had jeans, too. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
I had a bunch of jeans. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but that was his and there, what was funny, I worked organized crime, and of course we had this organized crime agency email address, and I said, what's your email address? He says, I have 2, and one was like an 8-digit number at hotmail.com.
Oh.
I said, what? Hold on. You're like a federal policeman and you have a Hotmail email address? Mm-hmm. And he says, yeah, you've got this organized crime dedicated address for email, but you only have 560 people here. So if someone was going to try to hack into emails, that's a small group to hack into. Try to hack into 40 million or 400 million Hotmail addresses.
Oh.
He says, which is more secure? And we went, oh, that makes sense.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah, there's just some random number assigned to the front. So, yeah, that was his secret fancy... His secret fancy email contact was a Hotmail address.
That's interesting.
We joked about it at the beginning, but when they explained it, I went, oh, that makes total sense. Yeah, there's like 4 million addresses compared to I guess we're 280 people, but it's really narrow ours down compared to his. See, look what we've done. Again, Tui, we've gone completely off sideways.
I just like hearing your stories.
It's like...
That's interesting. Yeah.
And then I'll throw some ghost ones in on top of those.
Oh, yeah, some ghosty.
Yeah, the ghosty police ones are bizarre. Uh-huh. We talked about death, and obviously we're talking about the dead people and and
cremated people.
And cremated people. One of the sad things that you touch upon in your book, 6 Feet Under Texas, is Amber Hagerman, who is famous.
Yeah.
But a lot of people just may not know who Amber Hagerman is because they have never heard her last name. They think her last name is Alert.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about Amber and where she is.
Yeah, so Amber Hagerman, it's just so sad. So like in the book, I point out that she had something like, 26 Barbies, and she sold, 135 boxes of Girl Scout cookies in a single day. Former Girl Scout, I was impressed. So she did these neat things at age 9, but her true legacy is that her name is now used for the Amber Alerts. She was, in the 1990s, she was snatched off the street while just riding a bike, and, the trail just went cold really quickly. The cops just didn't have anything to go on. And I don't know, a few days later, the whole community, it really disrupted the whole community. When a 9-year-old child disappears, and your little Arlington is just a little, it's a city, but still, it really did send ripples throughout the community, and people were just praying. They were hanging pink ribbons from trees in her grandparents' front yard, and people were just hoping she would be found alive, and she wasn't. And one of the things that was kind of horrifying is they realized that she hadn't been killed right away. She had been kept alive, I think, for at least 2 days from the evidence that they had. And so, one of those things that in retrospect, they're thinking, man, if we could have found her in those first 2 days, maybe she would still be with us. So the long and short of it is they created the Amber Alert system to help, get the word out when any kid 18 or under, I don't know if it stops right at 18, but if they've been kidnapped and people think it's a life-threatening scenario, they will, you get that horrifying sound on your phone, that and it's an Amber Alert. And that is her very unfortunate and sad legacy. And I just like to point out that I wanted to have her in the book because, so often we know the names of all these serial killers. We know John Wayne Gacy, we know Ted Bundy, we know all these murderers' names. But we don't, the victims get lost in all that. And so her name was used, it's an acronym, but it's actually called a backronym. So Amber stands for alert system. I can't remember the whole thing. But anyway, you spell out her name, it spells Amber, and it stands for this emergency alert system that we have now. That's,
it's sad, but I have this weird... I'm weird. Okay, we've kind of ascertained that. That's,
well established for us both.
Well established fact. I look at death and these kind of things a little bit differently now. I don't know, since through my career and talking to people like you and talking to people who talk to dead people, really, and my experience with seeing dead people and things, but it's opened a whole other side of me up. And I was a preliminary investigator on a serial killer in British Columbia here named Robert Picton. And we did surveillance on him for the longest time. And then we got told not to do it anymore because we didn't have any file knowledge. The Vancouver City Police weren't sharing anything with us, even though we had a bunch of information. Our bosses are saying, they're not doing anything. We've got literally, we have 6 homicides in town here, and we have families coming to the front counter wanting to know what we're doing about it. And you guys are following around this guy because an informant said he was picking up sex trade workers and taking them back to his home and killing them. But yes, we had him attempting to do that. He did cut up a sex trade worker the year before and she lived, but we don't have the files. They all come missing from Vancouver, British Columbia, and we were 40 minutes east in our town. And our bosses said, look, guys, you've got to get back to work doing what you're doing. And I was working drugs. The other people working youth detail. And the internals investigator. It was us doing surveillance. So we shut it down after 3 or 4 months. Anyway, a year or 2 later, he gets arrested. And out of the 40 or 50 people that are alleged he had murdered, he was found guilty of killing 22.
Wow.
And unfortunately, those 22 people went missing after we got told to stop.
Oh my gosh! Yeah.
But there was an inquiry, and as a result of the inquiry into the deaths of these women, a national inquiry came out, a full-on missing and murdered Indigenous women in Canada.
Wow.
And it affected the ripple effect from that inquiry, and what they found from it went right across the country and is now focusing a lot more on what you do with a missing child, a runaway child from an Indigenous community, and what kind of social services. It really put a spotlight onto the system itself in dealing with, and these poor girls were sexually abused as children, ran away, street workers, and they were targeted. And we look at it, and I'll get back to the point I'm making here, is I see that now as how many people had to die before there was a national outrage to the point where we had an inquiry looking at the entire country on how children were dealt with when they ran away from being sexually abused at home, who was actually the predators, when these women are murdered, who is murdering them? Are they white people or indigenous people, or where are they found and what age? So the whole thing was broken down. Police files are opened up from right across the country. As a result, it changed the way things went. So if 5 sex trade workers died, would have national inquiry done? Would 10? Would 20? No, it has to hit to a certain point. So my gut feeling, and I'm going to say this about Amber, they came into their lives knowing when they first signed up, like you can go back to the Akashic Records or whatever the system is, this is where I'm going to go and this is how I'm going to leave. And it's going to be horrific, but it's for the greater good. So when I look at somebody like Amber, her short life and horrific end created something national for the greater good that saved more people.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, I mean, on a different tangent, but since we already spoke about this, I wouldn't mention this if we hadn't gone into it. But the fact that she was 9 years old and she was a Girl Scout, to me, it really struck me and made me revisit the man who tried to abduct me and my friend. And I just, like, looking at pictures of her, it just was like, I mean, I spent like an afternoon, just kind of processing, thinking like, gosh, she was little. I mean, wow, what if I had not gotten away? I mean, it really made me revisit that incident in my life when I was writing the chapter about her and think like, wow, thank goodness, for that cemetery that my friend and I ran through. But,
yeah, it wasn't your time.
Yeah, it wasn't.
No,
it really wasn't.
And you don't want to be on the plane when it's the pilot's time. But the... that's how I feel, and I feel that it's like fighting a soldier dying for the good cause. How many people had to die to defeat Nazism?
Yeah, true.
Like, what is the waypoint? Where is the tipping point? It's like, let's say the Earth itself is going through some challenges, from global warming to severe weather to and pollution. How many people had to die of COVID before the switch got flipped to where we had a 90-day break?
Yeah.
So here's some people in homes, in old age homes, who said, okay, I'll go, because, and literally we had birds species flying into Vancouver here a month and a half after the shutdown that haven't been here for 100 years.
Wow.
Because the constant pollution cloud from cars that's been over top of us was gone. Because we're on the coast, it blew away. We could see Vancouver Island, which is 25 miles away, and I could actually see the images I could see the trees, where it wasn't just this hazy lump in the distance. You could actually see the definition of the trees and the smaller islands around it, which I've never seen in my lifetime. And then you look at Europe and like the canals of Venice being crystal clear and dolphins coming back into them. They're probably all gone now, or canned and being eaten. But the Earth needed, let's say the Earth needed a break. How many people had to voluntarily leave? Again, the Akashic Record things, before globally we hit a switch. And so
that is the really big picture. That is the 30,000 foot view down onto the situation, which is it's a cool way to look at it. Definitely. Yeah. I like to zoom in too, just on the individual, with Amber.
Yeah, Amber, to me, when you see what fell from her passing, it saved it's all it needs to save the lives of 2 other people. And it was, it was something. It was a gift that she left those around us. And I don't get down on me about COVID and all that stuff either, because my youngest daughter has COVID right now. Oh,
my dad just had it. He's 89. It's amazing.
Yeah, and if I have to go through one of those friggin' tests, I just got, as I'm talking to you, I got notified by my agent. They submitted me for a role in a movie here on September 1st. And one of the things, the stipulation was I'd have to get tested again.
Oh, what?
Damn it. I just 2 days ago.
You just had one.
Back. It's like, well, no, you'll have to get tested again. It's okay. I know you've already been tested, but you could have caught it between now and the 1st. So it's like,
oh,
dude,
my goodness.
really? As long as you take a swab of my my cheek and not have to stick that hockey
Way
stick up my nose again.
Ooh.
Holy cow, that was bizarre. But
Yeah, I haven't had one, but I guess they're not very nice.
Yeah, so my youngest daughter, she's 18 and she's got it, but she's doing a little bit better. But, she's 18, so everything, what she's seen on media was, oh, you have COVID, you're going to die. Like,
oh, I know.
No. It's like, you're going to be fine if you're, like, she's healthy as a horse. She's like 5'11" and a dancer. She's got legs up to her armpits and she's in really good shape. But, she had a sore throat and the doctor just sent her for a test and came back positive. So that's the whole side of her mom and her sister don't live with me, but they're completely locked down. Mm-hmm. And I had to go because I went over and felt to see if her glands were swollen when she had a sore throat. So no, I got to get tested.
Well, and also with COVID, I think I really worry about the healthcare professionals who are exposed to it every day, because there's that kind of the amount that you're exposed to seems to affect people I know who've been in healthcare who have gotten it. Seemed like they've gotten more sick than the people who got it from going to a restaurant. I don't know. There's so much we don't know about the old COVID. I don't claim to know. I just, I can only take so much COVID information each day too. I finally had to back off. I'm like,
Yeah, I do my thing. I do my social distancing. During that whole lockdown, I get on my motorcycle and just drive, and I'd be totally away from people. Then I pull up behind a car that was like 5 car lengths in front of me, and the guy was vaping. And the cloud, you can watch the cloud come all the way back, and I'm thinking, 6 feet's not going to do anything.
No.
If that's what happens when you exhale, just normally, holy cow! Now you've got this cloud that comes by. It's bizarre. Anyway, I'm happily to say that I have a few friends who had got contracted it. I'll be out somewhere and I'll cough, and people kind of look at me, and I'll just look at them and shake my head, and go, no, it's COVID-9. I'm good. I don't have the 19 one. This is just COVID-7.
Yeah, COVID-7. Yeah, fine. You're not going to get it.
Yeah, you'll be fine.
Cemeteries are a great place to go to social distance.
They are. Mm-hmm. And I find that cemeteries have a calming kind of relaxing effect on me, and when you when you get into those old ones, it's like opening a book in a library, a history book. And I just, what if I look at this tombstone and think, okay, this person died at the age of 17, and well, how did that happen? So I try to figure things out, and the old, you've seen them too, the what are they called, the something monkey trees. The monkey puzzle trees. Trees, yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And
I love those. You have more of those up in the Northwest. I always think they're fascinating. Yeah, I think they're some lore about those, about trapping the devil or something. Yeah,
the devil. They're at the edge of the cemetery, so the devil can't come down into the cemetery. Can't come down through, come off the tree or something like that. And I think, dude, just come around to the gate. It's like,
he's the devil. He's probably got some other ways to get around.
Hold on, you're digging a hole towards where he lives.
Yeah.
Well, you think he's coming from somewhere else.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah, but those kind of things, and that's how you can usually tell if it's the older section of the cemetery where the monkey puzzle trees are. Because they would have been planted back in the 1800s or earlier, back when that was a big thing. That's like, we got to keep the devil out of here. And down
here in Texas, those must take more water than we can do. We're looking, Larry and I are out looking for a cemetery, and we're actually lost. I start looking for cypress trees. And those a lot of times alert us. That's how I found the grave of Douglas, the Confederate camel, and stuff like that. Whoa, so
Douglas, the Confederate camel.
Yeah, he was. He served with a Confederate group in Vicksburg, and when the Confederates got, I'm botching this totally because I haven't thought about good old Douglas, but he's got a military grave, and the Confederates were surrounded, I think, by the Yankees and by the Union, and a Union sniper killed poor old Douglas. But Douglas was so cool. Like they didn't, the troops had horses that they would actually keep tied up or tethered in some manner. But Douglas kind of thought of himself as a person. He did not need to be tethered. He would hang around with his group, and they all loved him. He provided a lot of morale. They could play with him. He was just, and camels can be kind of cantankerous. They can, if they don't like you, they're going to let you know that. But a lot of the men just deeply loved their Douglas. But a Yankee sniper ended poor old Douglas's life, and the starving Confederate soldiers, I think, ate him. But what was left of him got a nice military funeral, and he has a grave with an official Confederate headstone on it. It's pretty cool. I've thought about doing another 6 Feet Under that's just all about animal graves, because I've got one about a monkey that's buried in a cemetery. It's buried in a restaurant courtyard down in Florida. I've been there. It's like you're eating this really nice, chicken Alfredo pasta or something, and there's a couple. This eccentric guy who had quite a menagerie, he buried his little monkey there, and the monkey was really well known. It was like a jazz era monkey that actually got an invitation to the Scopes, monkey trials and all that. And so I'm like, it'd be fun to do a 6 Feet Under just animal themed. So if anybody has a good animal theme out there, I'd love to just do that.
That's fascinating. That would be very, very interesting. We had camels here and during the gold rush.
You did? Wow.
We had camels were used, not dromedaries, they were the bacteria, the two-hump ones.
Oh.
They came out and they thought they would go there because it was, up in the drier desert area, and they could go for long periods without water, and they're good for hauling gear. But a camel's foot is very soft.
Oh, yeah.
And they're walking on shale and rocks and stuff, and they just eventually their feet were getting too cut up, and a lot of them they just let go. And there were wild camels here probably to the turn, probably the early 1920s or something.
Really?
30s. There were still wild camels up in some parts of British Columbia. But they obviously died off. But they were, I'll send you a picture of one. It's like,
that's cool.
One of I get a postcard on my fridge, a couple of miners with a camel.
Oh.
So, they're kind of cool. They the history of Pacific Northwest camels.
I didn't know that. Yeah, they really fascinate me. The way they fold up their legs, they're just such unusual animals. They're really neat.
And I can just imagine them coming around a corner and a horse looking at it going, what
are you?
Or our neighborhood, a moose going, what the, hold on.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
You've obviously been in an accident. Your back is all screwed up.
Yeah.
I'm going to let you go to him because I've talked to you for days.
Oh, my goodness gracious, we sure have.
We're talking to Tui Snider. Please, if you're interested in taphology, please grab her book, 6 Feet Under Texas. And if you're in Texas, my God, you better grab that book. 6 Feet Under Texas is Tui's latest book. Go to her website, tuisnider.com. Check out her other books, Understanding Cemetery Symbols, which is very, very cool. I have that one. And if you're in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, there's 100 things to do in Dallas-Fort Worth before you die, as well as Paranormal Texas. And that we've talked about Paranormal Texas. We had a whole show on that one too, and it was there's some really cool spooky stuff in your neighborhood because it's old enough, and the energy is such that really keeps this stuff going. And Tui, you've got to go to Tombstone, Arizona, and go see my friend Nora.
Okay.
Who is basically she runs the last of the she runs does it Taft and Tarbell, Watt and Tarbell. Anyway, I think it's Watts and Tarbell. It's the last of the mortuaries from back in the 1800s, haunted as heck, and it's got that window. You know where you're saying you just prop the guy up in the window if you can be identified. It's got the where you drive the Black Maria through the main door, and then it's got that narrow window set up beside it to the left where they would prop the coffins up, pack the guy with ice, and people would walk by to see who's dead today and to see if they could identify him. Yeah, it's fascinating, but she runs that, and it's a great little place, and it's got two really good cemeteries, and it's a very, very cool little town, and
I'm there. I want to go.
It sits on quartz and silver, and it's under the sunlight, so it generates enough energy that you could actually see dead people walking around. And I don't mean dead people from the 1800s. Yeah, they're there, but you can see dead people from last Wednesday.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's like Disneyland. Well, that's David Ullman's house, Disneyland for the Dead. But it's there's a lot of activity in that entire area. It's fantastic. But again, we're talking to Tui Snider. Please look her up, tuisnider.com. Thanks very much for dropping by, Tui.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. It's a blast as always. I love talking to you.
Watching you while you sleep on and on.
All right, that's it. Let's roll. And hey. Let's be careful out there.